Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at 1 Kings chapter 8, where we read of the dedication of the temple. So far in 1 Kings, we've seen chapters 1 and 2, Solomon's succession to the throne, a description of his wisdom and his wealth in chapters 3 and 4, and now, beginning in chapter 5, we had him building the temple, chapters 5 through 7. Chapter 8 now comes with the dedication of that temple. In that section, we've seen the preparations for building, the building of the temple, Solomon's own house, the ornamentation, but now this is the climactic event as the temple itself is dedicated. Chapter 8, verse 1, Then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, the leaders of the fathers' households of the sons of Israel, to King Solomon in Jerusalem to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord from the city of David, that's where it had been, that's just another word for that is Zion, or just means stronghold. And the ark was now going to be brought into the structure that had been prepared for it. See, the ark represents the throne of God. They're, as it were, bringing God into the building. Verse 2, all the men of Israel assembled themselves to King Solomon at the feast in the month Ethanim, which is the 7th month. The 7th month is where you would have the several feasts. You'd have the blowing of trumpets, Feast of Trumpets. You would have the Feast of Tabernacles, which sounds like this is happening here at this feast. The Feast of Tabernacles is when they would remember that there had been a time when they had dwelled in tents. And for an entire week, they would camp out in tents, in booths, in some sort of portable dwelling place. And the Lord, all this time, has been dwelling in a tent. And so the Lord, in a sense, is coming home, and this is a perfect time to picture that. And of course, we're reminded of the fact that Jesus tented with us. He took on flesh. He dwelled in that temporary dwelling. He still has flesh today, and he continues to dwell with us, both spiritually, but there's coming a day when he's coming back in bodily form, and he still is in the flesh. And there's coming back a day when again we will physically dwell with him. Verse 6, Then the priests brought the ark of the covenant of the Lord to its place, into the inner sanctuary of the house, to the most holy place, under the wings of the cherubim. Remember, the ark had statues of these two cherubim, these two winged creatures on the lid of it, but then in the temple itself, now we have much greater statues, two of them on either side, and the ark would be sitting between them. Chapter 8, verse 7, For the cherubim spread their wings over the place of the ark, and the cherubim made a covering over the ark and its poles from above, but the poles were so long that the ends of the poles could be seen from the holy place before the inner sanctuary, but they could not be seen outside. And notice the author adds, and they are there to this day. Now, that's a little anachronistic because eventually we're going to, by the time we get to the 2nd Kings, we're going to see the temple destroyed. The poles won't be seen at that point. But at the time when this section was written, and apparently we have different historical documents brought together, and at the time that this was written, the poles were still there. The Ark of the Covenant was still there in place. And so we here have an artist's image of what that would have looked like, with the poles sticking out and the Ark of the Covenant with the cherubim and its wings overshadowed over top of it. Verse 9, there was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets of stone which Moses put there at Horeb, where the Lord made a covenant with the sons of Israel when they came out of the land of Egypt. At an earlier date, there had been Aaron's rod, there had been a pot of manna, but those are now gone. I'm not sure what happened to them, but they're not there anymore. Now you have only the 2 tablets of stone. And remember, the tablets signified the covenant because the terms of the covenant had been written on them. And normally what you would do is you'd have the parties to a covenant, a big king and then a small king, and both of those parties of the covenant would each have their own copy. God had said, no, you take them, both of those copies, both of those tablets, and you're going to put it in the Ark of the Covenant, and you're going to keep them together because I'm dwelling with you. God is going to be with his people. Verse 10, it happened that when the priest came from the holy place, The cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priest could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. Notice how God, his manifested presence, moves into the building. Next, we have Solomon's blessing, that's verses 12 through 21, followed by Solomon's prayer, verses 22 through 61, a very long prayer. And part of that prayer, right close to the beginning, Solomon asked the question, but will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you. How much less this house which I have built? Solomon understands, the people understand, the priests understand that God cannot fit into a building. But his manifested presence will nevertheless be there. There's a sense in which God's presence is manifested in the temple. Understanding, though, that God is much bigger than the temple, much bigger than the earth, much bigger than the universe, we worship the infinite God. Verse 28, yet have regarded the prayer of your servant, and to his supplication, O Lord, my God, to listen to the cry and to the prayer which your servant prays before you today, that your eyes may be open toward this house, night and day, toward the place which you have said, my name shall be there, to listen to the prayer which your servant shall pray toward this people. And so there's a request, Lord, that you use this, even though you can't fit into a house. God doesn't need a house, and yet that is used as a directory for worship, where our hearts can pray toward that, and God has manifested his presence on the earth. Verse 30, listen to the supplication of your servant and of your people Israel when they pray toward this place. Hear in heaven your dwelling place, and hear and forgive. Next, we have a number of requests that Solomon makes, and they are 7 in number. The first one, verses 31 and 32, that God would judge any who wrongfully make an oath before the altar of the Lord. The second one, that God would forgive repentant people when they have been defeated. The third, that God would bring rain when a drought has come because of sin. The fourth request, that God would answer prayers in the face of famine and plagues. The fifth request, that God would hear their prayers when they go out to battle. Number 6, that God would hear the prayers of those in a foreign land and not at the temple. And the seventh request, that God would hear the prayers of his people while they are in captivity. Now, as we read all of those in order, and there's a specific order, they should be familiar to us if we have read through the book of Deuteronomy. You see, each of these requests is patterned after the blessings and curses that are given in Deuteronomy chapter 28, where God promises cycles of discipline upon Israel if they reject his word. God has said, look, if you keep my covenant, then here's all the ways I will bless you. If you do not, here's all the cursings. And those blessings and cursings are reflected here in Solomon's prayer. What is happening? No, here's Deuteronomy chapter 28. Here's the language. What is happening is Solomon is citing this passage. Here it is, Deuteronomy 28:25. The Lord shall cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You will go out one way against them, but you will flee, notice, 7 ways before them, and you will be an example of terror to all the kingdoms of the earth. And for those 7 ways, Solomon prays 7 requests that reflect those different ways that God had warned. You'll be scattered, you'll go out, and notice they grew in intensity until you'll be in a foreign land. You'll be taken into captive. And Solomon had made that part of this request. This reminds us of the one who was both a blessing but took our curse upon himself. And indeed, if you'll remember, as Jesus was upon the cross, that he prayed, and if you count all 4 Gospels and put them all together, you find 7 statements that Jesus makes upon the cross as he became a curse for us.